thing. Imagine that in your town. You're going to have a lot of dirty laundry when you bring it in from the drying line. So the dust would also impact the Lawsburg Swamp and the Middle Ground Flats, which are apparently more important for shad than they are for bass. But in fact, I gather there's some bass activity there. That's not going to be a good thing for the protected environments that we're dealing with locally. And of course, unloading the barges, never mind processing this stuff, unloading the barges, unloading the trucks makes some debris, dust as well. And so are they going to construct a gantry? Or are they going to use a conveyor? Are they going to just do with an excavator a load at a time? The flux of material that they're proposing to bring in, not store, and then move out by truck is so large that one 18-wheeler would have to back into the site, get loaded up, and then be dispatched every 20 minutes throughout a 12-hour day, 6 days a week. That's a lot of traffic. And you're going to have 11,000 18-wheeler dump trucks in your village for the foreseeable future if this proposal is allowed to go forward in its present form. Are you ready for that much traffic?
No way.
Oh, well, you do have definite opinions. Now, why can't they send this stuff to Albany or Queens, where they're set up to do this kind of transfer, for heaven's sakes? It doesn't make any sense to me. Why Athens, a pokey little terminal with 6 acres, when they got, you know, enormous areas which do this already up in Queens and up in Albany? It's not there. For those of you who have been paying close attention, the number 11,000 18-wheelers came up both in the Wheelabator proposal, that's how many ash trucks were coming into Catskill, and it's also the same number of trucks that would be taking C&D out of Catskill. That is a weird numerical coincidence, don't you think? I gave an interview on WGXC on Friday, and I didn't know why that coincidence was in play. It didn't make any sense to me then. But then I read the rules on the DEC's regulatory limits for various loads of material and types of operations that were allowed. And so this turns out that this number of 11,000 truckloads is not a coincidence. That works out, they quote these numbers in very different ways in the two proposals, but if you do the math, they both clock in at 500 tons a day, only just a little bit south of 500 tons a day. And amazingly enough, the other shoe dropped when I read the DEC regulations. There's a threshold at 500 tons a day. If you exceed that, then you're in a whole nother level of scrutiny of your proposal, and the permitting gets really, really icky. It's icky now, but it's even ickier if you're above 500 tons. So I think that this 500 ton a day limit is something to do with the coincidence that both want to run 11,000 trucks a day, a year through each of these proposals. What you have to know, though, is whether the fluxes, which are enormous, are limited by those DEC constraints. If the Trump administration rolls back those protections, would they have 20,000 trucks a day that they could send you? That's one possibility. The other possibility is that those 11,000 trucks a year are in fact an aspirational goal, as we dream of sending you 11,000 trucks a year. You don't know which it is yet. The proposal is too sketchy to know whether they really have that flux of material or whether they're banking on, you know, a really good run of getting there. And in order for you to evaluate this proposal in a way that's important, you have to know the answer to that question. There are other things that you need to know. You need to know what your zoning and regulatory tools are, and whether you have plans in place to deal with this sort of a project when it or not is proposed. And hoping that the mayor will have some things to say about that. Another thing that you have to know the answer to is, does the Steve Doring project in fact fit what plan there might be for the development of Athens or not? You don't know anything about their track record because they're an LLC company that was formed as a shell less than a year ago, and they have no track record. So you have to background check who's involved, whether they have a good record of actually doing this stuff on a consistent basis, and show good environmental stewardship. I think you also have to recognize that this is quite closely linked to the Peckham thing, and we have to just consider what Peckham's record as an environmental steward is. They're the guys that brought us Wheelabrator. They're the guys that were sued for abusing their permit at the Pike Road quarry, 15 years ago. And at the very least, you need to have a full environmental impact statement and a full SECR review. That's State Environmental Quality Review, for those of you who don't know what SECR is. And the guy you call and tell him that's what you want is Patrick Connolly of the DEC Region 4 headquarters. Here's his phone number. There's his email if you prefer the email approach. But if you have strong opinions on this is the guy to let know.
Can you read out the number?
The phone number is 518-357-2455. And the email is patrickconnolly@dbcnewyork.gov. I hope I've alerted you to important decisions that are coming in your future, because you do have choices to make here. You have elected officials who can help you make those choices in an informed manner. But unless you're informed, unless you stay engaged, you're not going to make the right choice. I hope you make them wisely. It's your future. I wish you very good luck with it. In the registration for the Steve Doring filing was a section on a surety bond calculation. If the project went south or folded or was completed for any reason, and they left big piles of junk at their site, they have to do a surety bond calculation for what's going to happen to clean it up when the show is over. They proposed to take leftover piles up to the Colony landfill in Cohoes, and there was here's how much the tipping fee is, here's what it costs to truck this stuff up, and so on. I'm here today as a member of Keep It Green to suggest to you that instead of sending the leftover piles to the landfill, you ought to send that proposal right to the landfill now. Here's a checklist of stuff you might want to do to further your engagement and increase your information flow. Thanks very much, and I'll turn it over to Diana or somebody.
Thank you, Dave. So before I bring Catherine back up to introduce the mayor and board of trustee, I wanted to let you all know that Keep It Green's website, Facebook page are all being updated. There'll be the video from today's session. We'll have fact sheets as we have them, and other ways to engage in future meetings. And you can sign up for Keep It Green's mailing list in the front of the room, and also Friends of Athens, to be kept abreast. And we're building coalition partners now to bring more community members together. There's also a fact sheet that you might have seen today that gives you good information on the Catskill landfill project. It has lots of helpful information, and we can get into that later. And there's donations too in the front for the Keep It Green members who put in a lot of their own resources to make today possible. So anything you can give would be appreciated. So I'm going to bring Catherine back up on stage, to the podium.
Stage seems a little much. But anyway, I'm here to introduce Mayor Stefan Bradicic, who is Mayor of the Village of Athens, He's going to present what we know thus far about this project, and also what the current legislation we have on books tells us what we can do, along with the waterfront development plans. And then also we have Robert Scott here, who is going to serve on the panel, although he will not be speaking right now. He's going to be answering questions later. When questions are asked from the audience. Thank you. Now here's Stefan Vajcic.
All right, so the goal is to get through without getting yelled at by Pat, so how am I doing so far? All right.
That's why he's elected.
I'm here to give you facts. I'm going to go through some facts. Rob and I and the village attorney met with Athens stevedore on Thursday night. I'm going to go a little off script here and discuss some of that. Again, I do not intend to be sensationalistic. I do not intend to speculate. But what I will tell you is when I give you the facts, you're going to want to go back to Dave's numbers. As I said in the Wednesday meeting, it's my job to review the facts. It's my job and the village board's job to take those facts and assess them against the laws. And I'm going to go into those laws here in just a minute after I talk about what we learned on Thursday night. Those laws also include pertinent applicable planning documents. And I'm going to talk about our comprehensive plan and our long-range waterfront revitalization plan, and how those are pertinent, and how community engagement and community involvement are so critical in making sure that those documents, which is the public's voice to the village government, change the laws and affect the laws in the way we need it. So let's start with what we learned Thursday night with Wheelabrator. I'll go through some of the data and the numbers they gave us, and I'll go through some of the math that we did. I'm just a dumb Marine. I'm not a Columbia professor. So I checked my math with their engineer. So every number that I'm going to give you is not me speculating. It's not me making anything up. These are the numbers that I worked with their engineer to make sure that I could add, subtract, and multiply appropriately. First of all, they're talking about 3 distinct and different materials. And that's going to be important here in a minute, why I'm specifically stating 3 distinct and different materials. Those materials are clean fill, asphalt millings, and concrete. Okay? The stated purpose that they give is to remove these materials from the city for use in redevelopment projects in Greene County. Now, the actual registration talks about taking this to 5 counties, actually, I think is what it is. It's not just Greene County. 5 regions. What they stipulated to us is redevelopment projects in Greene County. The registration that they've applied for, and I think Dave alluded earlier to, it is a registration, not a permitting process. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. The registration that they submitted for calls for 2,800 tons per week of each of those 3 materials that I discussed. So 2,800 tons of clean fill, 2,800 tons of asphalt milling, 2,800 tons of concrete, for a total of 8,400 tons per week, with a maximum allowable storage of 12,000 tons on that site. The current proposal says those materials will be stored outside in separate piles with no container. They assure us it is clean and uncontaminated, that the material will be inspected prior to shipment and will maintain a closed-loop chain of custody throughout the process. As Dave discussed, those materials will be processed on site. That process includes sifting and crushing, what Dave showed you. When I asked about that, the engineer's quote was, "Dust may be an issue." Finally, Dave talked about using a different facility with which to ship out quarry material, right? Because they don't want those barges to go back empty. In this case, quote, "significant quantities of stone from local quarries will be loaded onto the barges on site to be shipped back to the city." So now the math, again, confirmed with their engineer, so you don't have to trust just my dumb Marine here doing this work. 8,400 tons at 15 tons per truck, which is what their engineer told me the trucks haul, is 560 tons per week. In a 6-day week, 560 trucks over a 6-day week is 93.3 trucks per day. In a 12-hour day, 93.3 trucks is 7.7 trucks per hour, or a truck every 8 minutes. Okay, then I got to the end, where he mentioned that they want to move quarry material out. And I said, those are probably not the same trucks. And he agreed. So now if we want to fill barges, worst case is we're doubling that number to 186.6 trucks a day, 15.5 trucks an hour, a truck every 4 minutes. Those are the facts that are presented to us so far. So let's talk about what we have available to us from a legal standpoint, from a standpoint of what lines of defense exist for us. The first line of defense that we have is, or should be, the Department of Environmental Conservation. And they quoted to me the first time I talked to them, right after I heard this, what Dave mentioned about 500 tons per day, meeting under the threshold of a requirement to be permitted, and only requiring a registration. And I did the math. Well, it turns out, and I checked this with an engineer, 8,400 tons per week is 1,200 tons a day, which is, again, checked with an engineer, more than 500 tons a day. So I called the DEC back. Remember I mentioned 3 distinct and different types of material. Well, the rules on permit versus registration, 500 tons a day of clean fill, 500 tons a day of asphalt milling, and 500 tons a day of concrete. Allows for a registration of under 500 tons. So, first of all, let me go back a little bit and thank Diana and thank the groups for bringing this to our attention. This has been with the DEC since February. Been with the DEC since February of 19, and at no point has it come to the village. So that should be our first line of defense. And in order to make sure it is our first line of defense, I sent them a letter Friday afternoon highlighting that we have some concerns over the due diligence that has been done so far by the DEC. Specifically, we discussed the size of the surety bond. We asked how the DEC ensures that the material is verified free of asbestos and other harmful materials. We asked the DEC to explain to us how it's weighed. How do we know that we're getting 8,400 tons a week? How do we know that there's 12,000 tons being stored on site? What is the verification plan for that? We asked what the containment requirements are or should be. We didn't feel that 3 piles, and really it's just drawn in circles because I specifically asked the engineer, what is the size of that pile on this 6-acre lot? What is the pile if all 3 are the same, all 3 materials have the same amount on average? What's the size of a pile if we have 12,000 tons just of concrete? And they didn't have those answers, so they're giving us that. One of the other things, and this was as I'm sitting in the village office on Friday, on the phone with the village attorney trying to put this letter together, we got a call in the office from a local citizen who was doing exactly the same thing we were and reviewing Part 360, who said, hey, according to Section 8, this specific use is prohibited on wetland. This 6 acres, a portion of it, is wetland. So that was in the letter as well. So that went off to the DEC director on Friday. It was CC'd to the county and is here. It was CC'd to Assemblyman Tay. While he's in session, his staffer has contacted me half a dozen times in the last 2 days. Very interested. They have a meeting with the DEC the end of the month, and they're going to bring these numbers to them. It was CC'd to Amador, and it was CC'd to Congressman Delgado, and I also sent him a personal note asking that he look into, what I'm asking for obviously is due diligence at the DEC. Okay? next line of defense, and I don't remember whether Paul or Dave mentioned seeker. We talked a little bit about environmental impact statements. Seeker is the State Environmental Quality Review Act. Okay, and what it says is that for any project, public or private, that you have to account for environmental requirements every bit as much as social and economic requirements. When you go for a registration with the DEC and not a permit, there is no DEC level seeker requirement. That said, we did send a note immediately to Athens, Steve Doran, letting them know what our local laws are and letting them know that we will be conducting a seeker as the lead agent here in the village. We also let them know that because, those of you who've driven by it know that the boat launch is adjacent to this piece of property, which is a state park. Because it abuts a state park, it immediately puts it up into a type 1, which is a longer form, does require an environmental impact statement. And we also let them know that all of that, per the law, is at their expense, not at the village residents' expense. In addition to that, our engineer, we have a very good engineering firm that we work with. He's getting ahead of that, looking at, informing me and informing the board of what other environmental impacts we need to be concerned of. Obviously, what are 100+ average trucks a day going to do to 385?
How many oil tankers a day do we get on 385?
I don't know that off the top of my head.
Probably
It's
one
nowhere
every
near
15
that.
minutes.
Yeah. What's that?
At least one every 10-15 minutes. Early spring until winter. Same oil tanker, we know who it is. And that's just in addition to it.
Yeah,
Right?
in
It's
addition,
not like the
that's right.
streets are empty now.
That's right. They quoted me, they had done some math on 9W specifically, that they presented to us, how well 9W could handle it, but they had not considered 385. If it's okay, we're going to do a panel at the end. Can I ask that we hold some questions, and I'll try to get through the boring part, and then we can get to some questions. So the next line of defense is our planning board. This is zoned mixed-use waterfront. There are no permitted uses for mixed-use waterfront. Every use of mixed-use waterfront requires a special use permit, which means it has to go to the planning board. It has to do a site review. One of the current uses is industrial. It is a permittable use via special permit. And industrial, actually, when you look at the definition, does allow for this type of work. That said, the zoning rules specific around mixed-use waterfront talk about impacts of traffic, talk about impacts of dust and noise. It does give us some outs, but it's not a guarantee. The comprehensive plan, which came out in 2007, one of the things they did in that comprehensive plan was they looked at the waterfront and said, we don't really want to be an industrial waterfront. So they changed the zoning in 2007 as a result of that comprehensive plan from industrial use to this mixed-use waterfront requiring special use permit for any use. That was a powerful thing that came out of that comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan, it does still talk about industrial uses and bringing economic revitalization and jobs into the community. But the comprehensive plan is entirely driven by public input. And we are in the midst of a review of it right now. And I want to ensure that no decisions are made on this until we have completed that review. And that's one of the things that we're looking at, how do we do that today. So we want to get those inputs, take those inputs into account, and make any changes we need to make as a result of that comprehensive plan before we consider this. Next is the Waterfront Advisory Committee, which is, again, it's governed by what's called the Long Range Waterfront Revitalization Plan. It's not terribly specific or prohibitive in this case about what it can do. It states things like businesses should enhance the site and be compatible with the area. It gives a priority to activities that are enhanced by waterfront use. And it states that any waterfront use should improve the economic base of the community. So it doesn't give us a whole lot of specific outs, but it informs the comprehensive plan and the other laws. I mentioned that while I was writing that letter, we got a call which gave me some very good insight into Part 360. I mentioned that we're in the midst of a review of the comprehensive plan right now, and it is entirely open to public comment, public input, and we want to get feedback. The Wednesday meeting, we had 70 residents attend, and I would love to see that continue. I assure you there will not be a meeting that goes by that this is not a discussion topic, and that this is not a static thing. We will continue to work at it in accordance with the laws, in accordance with the facts, and we will continue to move forward on working this project and taking actions as appropriate per the law. And I want to make sure everybody is engaged and involved, and I would love to see more meetings with 70 people. We'll start holding them here if we need to. So stay involved, please. I'm already being helped by people in the community, helping me keep my feet to the fire, give me information that maybe I haven't seen yet, come and inform our laws via the comprehensive plan, stay involved, make your voice a part of this process, and we will continue to work it in accordance with those laws that you put in place. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
So we've been given a little extra time today for questions and answers. We're going to take as many as we can. If we can keep to questions and not statements, so we can make the most out of everybody's time. And if you could please just raise your hand when you're called upon, direct your question to one of our panelists for an answer, and we'll get to as many as we can. When we're finished, I see you, when we're finished, we have a little direction here about traffic and how to leave the site safely, just so you're aware. And I think that's it. So let's get some questions, and feel free to stay out longer and speak to your representatives or our panel guests. Okay, so first.
Does the Department of Transportation have any oversight into such things as weight limits of the trucks or the amount of traffic that's going to be coming in on 385?
Would you repeat the question?
So the question is, essentially, what oversight does the Department of Transportation have into truck traffic and the amount of truck traffic? And that's a good question. It's a question that we have asked but don't have an answer to yet. Also asking, what are the pertinent weight limits on 385? And then down to specifically, what should we expect as a village this type of truck traffic to cost us in the cost of maintaining 385? So all things that we're looking at, I don't have those answers yet.
Hi, I have a question for Dr.
Louder.
Okay,
Thank you.
no problem. I have a question for Dr. Wapar. Do you think that deregulations that are going on currently in our country will have any impact on this problem in our community?
The question was, do I think that the deregulation, which is in progress throughout the federal jurisdiction, will have an impact here? It
Correct.
sets the tone in perhaps a negative way.
Gotta go louder.
I believe it sets the tone in a negative way. On the other hand, the states have a certain amount of leverage on their own, and that they can enact some things that supersede the federal requirements. So I don't think it's a good thing to be deregulating entirely. But to be entirely fair, I have to say that my, shall we say, immersion in the DEC permitting and reporting process convinces me that I would be very annoyed if I were CEO and had to go through this. On the other hand, I have to say that doesn't mean that I think it's unnecessary, because the past history of industry and commerce has left us with Superfund sites, PCBs in the Hudson, bad air quality until we turn to regulation. I'm afraid it is necessary that we burden ourselves with these regulatory routes, which can be really, really, really annoying, remember, April 15th isn't that far away. If you have trouble figuring out your income taxes from the forms that the IRS give you, that's a dream compared to a DEC SECR review. And it's necessary, or you're gonna wind up with PCBs on your drinking water.
You know, the question about whether the current deregulatory attitude in this country is going to make your jobs harder, I'm not a Dr. Feelgood here when I say it isn't going to, because if you stay unified, your power in this process will so overwhelm any possibility of deregulation at the state and local level that you will maintain the high ground on this straight through if you stay together.
In the back here, or in the side? You? Yep.
Me?
Yep.
Who actually owns the land, and what transpired that this piece of land is for sale and even up for discussion? Is it Peckham land, or is it land that's just been sitting around and nobody's been doing anything? Who owns it? Who actually owns it?
The question is, who owns the land? The owner is a entity called DBLT, Realty or something of the sort, owned by one David Motzkin down in Woodstock, I think. On the other hand, it's not quite clear what his link to it is, because my understanding, when the water board sort of convinced Peckham to give up their, this is the old Peckham North Terminal, when they convinced them to relocate that operation out to Schoharie Turnpike, that in fact the future use of the land that we're talking about would be some sort of hospitality industry or other use, non-industrial. I don't know what happened to that fund. That disappeared into thin air. When you talk to Mr. Motzkin on the phone, he'd be happy to sell it to you for $1 million right now, because he's gotten perhaps a sinking feeling that this project might not go through. He offered it to Diana 2 weeks ago for $1 million. You know, if you got $1 million, you can make a killing here.
Excuse me, no disrespect to the panel up front, but I'm going to face my direction over here. Mr. Mayor came up with the figure of about 4 to 6 trucks per minute. Did that include the return trip back to where they're coming from? I just want to be clear.
So no, the question was, when I gave the calculations on the number of trucks, with the 90 trucks at about a truck every 8 minutes, and potentially worst case when they're bringing the quarry material in up to a worst case of 186 trucks, that is a round trip. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
I kind of have 2 questions, but I'm going to piggyback off of this gentleman's question. When we talk about Department of Transportation, what if we're using Union Street to go out to Schoharie Turnpike? That doesn't fall under the state, that falls under the town, correct? So then, how is the town affected by that? What is...
Union Street, there's I think it's a 30-ton weight limit on it. There's a 30-ton weight limit, so there should be no commercial truck traffic at all on that street. If they're caught, then the police would issue them tickets on that. It's not a designated truck route.
My other question for the planning board is, as far as noise pollution goes, is that something that we can look into? Because you've got to apply for a special permit for the music in the park every Friday night, or for a band at a local restaurant. Why can't we say we have a decibel radius on specific noise pollution?
So as I mentioned, the special use permitting in the planning board, while industrial is a legal use, requiring a special use permit, there are restrictions. They're not specific restrictions, which is good and bad. But noise, dust, odor, traffic are all considerations that the planning board is required to evaluate as part of their determination as to whether or not to issue that special use permit.
So do we not have anything?
1 second, we're going to get more questions. Okay? Thank you. You want to go?
Mayor, you mentioned that we have a local waterfront revitalization plan. I think in that case, the Department of State also can get involved. So that may be another road that can be looked at.
Yes, that's right. So the waterfront plan is on file with the Department of State. And it is a record with the Department of State. And what it means, the fact that we have the local waterfront revitalization plan and a waterfront advisory committee, it means that since this is waterfront, it requires that the planning board refer the site plan and the review over to the waterfront advisory committee to review it in accordance with the local waterfront revitalization plan. Claire, you want to add to that?
I just want to point that out that because there's no action in the water, the Department of State has no cause to evaluate consistency with the federal regulations. So the DOS at this moment in time has no role. That does not mean that the WAC doesn't review it for consistency with the LWRP, but the DOS at this moment in time is not involved.
Thank you.
So basically, you know, what it looks like that there needs to be a special permit to the planning board. And that's basically the planning board is going to be voting on this if it gets that far. I mean, obviously, the first thing to do is call Patrick O'Connelly and, you know, 20 times a day to make sure that they know how we feel about this.
Yes, so the planning board ultimately is our primary tool to evaluate this. The first thing is we require and conduct a seeker and a long-form environmental impact survey. That's part of what the planning board will review. The planning board will refer to the Waterfront Advisory Committee, who will also provide inputs back to the planning board for consideration of the planning board, and then the site review and other impacts that the planning board needs to review in accordance with those.
David? I can shout. When you look at what the mayor just said, there's a lot to unpack in there, as the expression goes these days. You can be exempt from environmental impact review, which is what the state will say they are, although we'll continue to see whether or not there are ways to do that and get the state involved in the environmental impact review, which would be ideal. And there are non-exempt projects, and the non-exempt projects are then categorized and shooted into different spaces, and sometimes they're said to be type 2, which is not likely to have a significant adverse impact. And then there's the type 1s that the mayor mentioned that I'm pretty sure he said this is being treated as a type 1. The presumption is that it is likely to have at least one significant adverse impact. You can choose in these regulations between about 35. Everything from noise I heard, dust I heard, truck trips, you could go on and on. Or you can go down to archaeological resources or community character or growth patterns. All you have to do is find one of these issues to be potentially significant, and an environmental impact statement will be required. Now, you all can do the math. There's 35 different potential adverse impacts. I remember when before I went to work for the DEC, I was working for a law firm, and the client didn't want to do an environmental impact statement, and I looked at the regs and I said, well, all you have to do is fall afoul of one of these categories, noise, dust, whatever, and you got to do an EIS. The client falls afoul of about 14 of them. So I don't know, you guys might be out ahead of 14 on this one. So you should be looking for something called a positive declaration and an environmental impact statement.
Go ahead. This question is for the mayor. From Peckham, what is the official authorized truck route to get to 9W from Peckham?
I'm afraid I don't have that answer, Pat. I don't know.
Isn't it
It's
Second
something I can look at.
Isn't it Second Street?
I think it should be 385, but I'll find out for you, that I don't know off the top of my head. Along those lines, something that I neglected to mention is I did call Mark Evans yesterday, the mayor of Cooksaki, right? Because these trucks are either going right through the village of Athens into Catskill, but if they go the other way going north, they're literally driving right through the middle of the village of Cooksaki, which he was quite interested in as well. So we're getting them engaged as well.
Thank you.
So what about a study that would require them to look at the health impacts of this? And with that tremendous amount of particulate matter going, Sleepy Hollow and downwind and Hudson and things like that, surely there must be some...
Absolutely a part of the process, yeah. It's part of the secret process.
Okay.
Sir?
So with respect to ownership, we're talking about, it's 133 North Washington? Right. My wife and I, 134, we're in the Upper Village School. So this neighbor is in Woodstock, the owner?
The owner.
Yeah?
Yeah.
How does that play into this? He refuses to sell. I mean, it's his property. I mean, eminent domain is being applied here. I mean, my point here is maybe he doesn't want to sell to this, to this company. I'm not understanding if the site is owned, it would have to be sold, correct?
He has currently my understanding is he has an agreement to sell pending registration through the DEC. So the only pending on the sale, the only item that the sale is contingent on is DEC registration approval.
You're coming here too. Go ahead, sir.
My question
Hold on
is,
just a second.
just a second. I live in Woodstock.
Randolph,
Right.
Randolph, hold on, we have a few people. You're
I don't-
three.
Diana suggested that I
No, I'm
clarify that there may be a familial relationship between the responsible party at Steve Doring and the purported seller of the land. Okay? It's probably beyond question.
State that again, sorry.
Somebody said, what if the owner of the land refuses to sell to the stevedore? If one brother refuses to sell to the other, where they have a common interest?
Okay.
Sir, go ahead.
In other words, there's a familial relationship here.
There is unquestionably
Let's keep things to questions, please, so we can get more in. Thank you.
Did anybody find out about how many barges are coming up? Is it one a day? Are they gonna be anchored, 10 of them outside Athens here, like they do south of Kingston?
So-
We're looking at the other end now.
So that's a question that Rob and I asked when we met with them earlier in the week. There's not a definite answer, and we're trying to get them to improve the answer. It could be done theoretically in 3 very large barges a week, to move, one barge for each of the materials essentially. What they felt is that was unlikely. They would likely use smaller barges, in which case they could not give me a total count of the barges. It's something that we asked them to clarify for us.
Would they be allowed to bring 10 up a week, anchor 7 of them, because it's cheaper for them?
I'm not aware of any specific restrictions right now on barge.
Ma'am?
I don't have a question, but I've been looking at property land records for a year. And it was a Green Ida. Green Ida bought it from Postco. Green Ida then turned it over to DeBartle, which turned into DBTL. And then Peckham was there. My big search on this is in the Green River study and in several publications. An agreement was made when Peckham took over the Athens site in Schoharie that they were supposed to work with the village on making something else of it. And the only thing I've gotten on that, unfortunately, Renee is away for 3 weeks, was that somebody else was the chairman of the board during that time. Well, no matter what happened, they got the site, so why wasn't Peckham held to the fire on working in the village? That's what I'm on.
Okay, thank you.
And the 2 guys, they're brothers who are in charge of it. They're a realty company, so it's just like Stevedorin, formed in March 12th. So was another company that same day out of that same office called 10 North Washington, and when you Google it, it points right to the property we're talking about. So, I mean, I think IDA is part of what we need to be looking into too. Like, how did this happen, that this land is vulnerable when it wasn't supposed to?
Thank you.
Yeah, this is, I guess, for Mr. Mayor. What can the people in this room right now do over the next 2 to 4 weeks to help out?
Good question.
Participate in board meetings. I'd be happy to have as many people at board meetings as possible. I'd love to get feedback. I'm engaging. I've gotten several extremely useful comments already from folks who know things about how to deal with processes like this, right? And like I said, the letter that went out Friday, included some feedback that I got from local residents. So keep that kind of stuff coming. People who know, have information, have done this type of thing before, I will take any and all input. The other really big one is get involved in this comprehensive plan review that we're doing. Again, I want to make sure that we get that done because we started that process several months ago. We went out and got the grant to do it. So my intent is that we see that done before any decisions are made on this project.
One moment.
Is there a published list of when the comprehensive plan meetings are taking place?
There is. I don't know them off the top of my head. You want to give me some dates, Josh?
No, but is it on the site? Is it on the
It's on the website, yes.
Okay, it is?
It's not on the site, it's on
I
the...
don't think so. How are we supposed to get to these meetings if we don't even know where they are?
So, hello everybody. I'm one of the village trustees, Dr. Josh Lipsman. I'm coordinating the update of the village comprehensive plan. We have one meeting scheduled, which is Thursday, March 5th, from 6:30 to 8 p.m. This one is on our website. It's at E.J. Arthur Elementary School. It's a meeting of the town of Athens and the village of Athens. It's open to the public, but it is the first meeting in a series of meetings to get input for the comprehensive plan. There will be 2 additional meetings which will be published. The reason they haven't yet been published is because we don't have a location for them yet. But one will be Saturday afternoon, March 28th from 1 to 5. And the other one will be Tuesday evening, March 31st from 6:30 to 8:30. And just as soon as we have a location in the next 2 or 3 business days, we'll be widely circulating the information about where those are through all the various options that we have to get information out.
I would like to propose a supplemental answer to the gentleman on the side's question about what else you could do in the next 2 to 4 weeks. And it relates to something that the mayor has already recommended and Dave as well. And that is be in touch with the DEC. There have been several issues that the DEC has got to come to grips with, and get a copy of the mayor's letter. I'm sure he'll put it up, get it to you somehow. One issue is the presence of wetlands on the site, making it a prohibited activity. Another issue is the question of the applicant. Has the DEC done an analysis of the suitability of the applicant? Because that's a specific category of determination that has to get done under these regulations, and a specific potential grounds for denying the application if the applicant's compliance history is not suitable. One thing that Dave showed in the screen was that picture of what the material looks like. Be aware that the word fines has 2 meanings. You can fine a company for violating the law, and fines are the particles that you find mixed in with all of that other stuff. That can have wallboard in it. That could make this an unacceptable facility for a registration and require a permit. Another way to require a permit, which would trigger an environmental impact review, is if other permits were required, such as a wetlands alterations permit or a dredge and fill permit. So ask the DEC, are there other permits that are under consideration here? And then ask them a blanket question. Is there anything in your statutes and regulations that would allow you to treat this like a permit and require an environmental impact statement? Because this impact is huge, and the law is not supposed to let stuff like this go by the board.
Can you put this on some bullet points on the website for us and let us know?
We would be.
Because I'll make 10 of those calls if it's easy.
My question is,
Let me, real quick, on the same topic, right? First of all, you've got two groups represented in the room here that will be putting a lot of information out. Get on the mailing list. I think they've got opportunities to do that up front and the back. Second, I mentioned that the letter that I sent is CCing basically everyone in the chain, from the county, the state legislators, and Assemblyman Tague is very engaged, and Congressman Delgado. I would love to see pressure put on the DEC to ensure that due diligence is being handled, right? It seems to me very easy to get through the DEC process and put this entirely on the local government to manage and deal with this. I would like to see a little more rigor done at that DEC level, and I think some of our state and federal representatives can and should help us to do that.
Okay, we have 3 more questions, starting here.
Please make an additional.
Yeah.
That website will have this stuff on it fairly soon. The website for keepitgreen.earth. Another thing that I wanted to say about the DEC, I urge you to contact Patrick Connolly, but don't do it in an aggressive and hostile manner. These guys are stretched thin. They don't have the resources to follow up on a lot of things that they need to be doing. And if you come at them as, why aren't you doing your job kind of approach, it isn't going to work well. I should say that, for instance, Connolly, who wrote the stop and desist letter to Peckham, they do a really, really good job of being aggressive in their scrutiny of the stewardship which is being proposed. I can't say enough good things about the stuff that they point out and catch them up on. Where they fall short is in finding the teeth to actually bring judgments and do enforcements. The SWAT team hit on Corollas was way, that's 5 sigma beyond their usual response. So sometimes they do rise to the occasion when it's a really egregious thing, like all that DDT was found laced into his debris down in Saugerties. But, let the DEC know that you care about this, but don't be aggressive with them.
Also, there are two parties at the DEC. We're talking about Don Connolly right now, and he's in charge of the wetlands. But the person who's in charge of, sorry, I'll speak in a lower decibel. The person who is in charge of the materials name is John Weidman. So we can get you that information. I've talked to him on the phone, and both also Dan Connolly too. And the thing to do is to say, look, John, we really need an environmental impact review.
I was a DEC regional director. In other words, I had 180 people in permitting and in wetlands and in solid waste and in air, hazardous waste that I was responsible for. You want to go to the regional director on this.
Okay,
this is an important issue, and I can say that even if he was standing next to me or she was standing next to me, I'd say the same thing. The person with who's on point in that office should be coordinating on this.
Thank you so much. That's really good. Okay, so
That person is Nancy Baker. Nancy.Baker.
Go ahead.
Wait, I'm checking. Everybody's ready?
Yes.
So it seems as though the transfer of ownership has not yet gone through, and is this not enough for you? Is that okay? And then my question then would be, is there any way to prevent it other than being the wall of resistance, which seems we all are, and I'm very happy about that. There's no, and I don't know enough about sales like this. This is an agreement outside of what we could do, and if there's no injunction, nothing can stop that. Because once it goes through, now we have a very ugly neighbor, and they're gonna wanna either make it, push it through, or dump it, and who knows, you know, I'm sure they're not gonna be scrupulous as to who they sell it. So, is there any way to stop a sale?
It's contingent on
So the question is there a way to stop or prevent the sale going through? The sale is contingent on the DEC registration being approved. So that, you know, that's our first line of defense. It would be if we can put more teeth into that registration process, prevent the registration going through that, prevents the sale per the current contingency. Beyond that, I don't know the numbers.
I got a question.
Other than having $1 million.
A few years ago, Peckham moved out of that place down there on Washington Street, right? It went out to the park. The reason why they did it, because they had the barges come up the river full to dump their oil or whatever with asphalt on it. And they needed to be deeper. And they asked for a dredge to dredge that section out, and they were denied. Now all of a sudden, they want to bring barges up the other place, and they didn't touch that river.
That's absolutely true, and it is something that we are going back to the DEC and pushing on as well to try to understand how it is they intend to get these barges, which goes back to the other question and why I'm trying to get clarification on how many and what size barges are they bringing in to try to get some teeth into exactly that.
Thank you. Last question, sir? Right here?
When you're talking to the engineers in this firm, did you get a sense of what kind of time we're talking about? Like deadline, when they want this registration, when they hope to have it approved? So we have some kind of an idea what kind of time we're working with, or
right now.
So the question is, what type of timeline did we get the impression from Athens stevedoring as far as when they would like to start the project? We did not get specifics from them on that. They did not give it to us. However, one of the questions you asked that's very important is, when do they anticipate getting the permit?
Right.
And we actually kind of left a little vague as to whether they thought they already had it, which is why we got that letter out Friday, because this is just in time right now. Again, I'll go back and thank the folks who uncovered this. It is just in time. They really believe they're very close to getting that registration through the DEC, which is why we tried to very quickly get a letter out to the DEC to add it. As far as that, they anticipated, once they get that permit, 4 to 6 weeks to come to us for the special use permit. So that's the only kind of timeline that we discussed.
You know what, I'm going to take one last question because you haven't asked one yet. So go ahead, sir. Up back here.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for everybody coming today. This is great. My question is, has anybody gotten information to us about who is going to run these trucks? Okay? We need to know who this is. I mean, all these trucks aren't going to appear out of nowhere. And has anybody considered the safety aspect of these trucks? The trucking industry is my profession. It has been for decades. And I'm here to tell everyone here, garbage and demolition is the lowest form of trucking there is. There's nothing lower. There's nothing more unsafe. There's nothing more dangerous. They'll be driving down 385, which I live on, at 461, just north of the boat launch. They'll be driving down the road with untarped loads, half-tarped loads. The grit, the asbestos, and everything will be blown out all over the place. We need to look into the trucking aspect of this big time, because we need to know what their plans are with who's going to do it. Peckham in the past has always done their own trucking. They don't anymore. We've got private contractors coming out of the Athens plant Who knows who they are? Who knows where they come from? These guys are running 20-year-old trucks, no mufflers on them. They open up their engine brakes in the middle of the night and wake everybody up. Nobody seems to care. You call down to White Plains and you talk to the bid shots down there, and they don't want to hear anything. So I think the trucking